Hi guys. Today I'd like to share a wonderful, simple economic educational material made by Ray Dalio. Have you ever heard of him? He is kind of the Steve Jobs of investing. He runs world's largest hedge fund, Bridgewater. His performance was awesome. And he is also famous for making and sharing his knowledge with a very simple and easy material for the public to understand. And the video gonna shadowing I'm gonna shadow, it's also one of them. And the part I will shadow is about the depression, the deleveraging status of total economic cycle. The reason why I picked this part is that Ray Dalio recently is warning has been warning us this deleveraging is coming in a very short term, 2 or 3 years. So I'd like to be prepared for any crisis. It could be very painful if you are not ready. So let's go for it.
Over decades, debt burdens slowly increase, creating
Over decades, that burdens slowly increase,
larger and larger debt repayments.
creating larger and larger debt repayments.
At some point, debt repayments start growing faster than incomes,
At some point, debt repayments start growing faster than incomes,
forcing people to cut back on their spending.
forcing people to cut back on their spending.
And since one person's spending is another person's income,
And since one person's spending is another person's income,
incomes begin to go down,
incomes begin to go down,
which makes people less creditworthy,
which makes people less creditworthy,
causing borrowing to go down.
causing borrowing to go down.
Debt repayments continue to rise,
Debt repayments continue to rise,
which makes spending drop even further.
which makes spending drop even further.
And the cycle reverses itself.
And the cycle reverses itself.
This is the long-term debt peak.
This is the long-term debt peak.
Debt burdens have simply become too big.
Debt burdens have simply become too big.
For the United States, Europe, and much of the rest of the world,
For the United States, Europe, and much of the rest of the world,
this happened in 2008.
this happened in 2008.
It happened for the same reason it happened in Japan in 1989,
It happened for the same reason it happened in Japan in 1989
and in the United States back in 1929.
and in the United States back in 1929.
Now the economy begins deleveraging.
Now the economy begins deleveraging.
In a deleveraging, people cut spending.
In a deleveraging, people cut spending.
Incomes fall.
Incomes fall.
Credit disappears.
Credit disappears.
Asset prices drop.
Asset prices drop.
Banks get squeezed.
Banks get squeezed.
The stock market crashes.
The stock market crashes.
Social tensions rise.
Social tensions rise.
And the whole thing starts to feed on itself.
And the whole thing starts to feed on itself the other
other
way.
way. As incomes fall and debt
As incomes fall and debt repayments rise,
repayments rise, borrowers get squeezed.
borrowers get squeezed,
No longer creditworthy,
no longer creditworthy,
credit dries up,
credit dries up,
and borrowers can no longer borrow enough money to make their debt repayments.
borrowers can no longer make debt repayments.
Scrambling to fill this hole,
Scrambling to fill this hole,
borrowers are forced to sell assets.
borrowers are forced to sell assets.
The rush to sell assets floods the market.
The rush to sell asset floods in the market,
At the same time as spending falls.
and at the same time, the spending falls.
This is when the stock market collapses.
This is when stock market collapses.
The real estate market tanks and banks get into trouble.
The real estate market tanks and banks get into trouble.
As asset prices drop,
As asset prices drop,
the value of the collateral borrowers can put up drops.
the value of the collateral borrowers can put up drops.
This makes borrowers even less creditworthy.
This makes borrowers even less creditworthy.
People feel poor.
People feel poor.
Credit rapidly disappears.
Credit rapidly disappears.
Less spending,
Less spending,
less income,
less income,
less wealth,
less wealth,
less credit,
less credit,
less borrowing,
less borrowing,
and so on.
and so
It's
on.
a vicious cycle.
It's a vicious cycle.
This appears similar to a recession,
This appears similar to a recession,
but the difference here
but the difference
is
here
that interest rates
is that interest rates
can't be lowered to
can't be lowered to
save
save
the
the
day.
day.
In a recession,
In a recession,
lowering interest rates works to stimulate borrowing.
lowering interest rates works to stimulate the borrowing.
However, in a deleveraging, lowering interest rates doesn't work
However, in a deleveraging, lowering interest rates doesn't work
because interest rates are already low
interest rates are already low
and soon hit 0%.
and soon hit 0%.
So the stimulation ends.
So the stimulation ends.
Interest rates in the United States hit 0% during the deleveraging of the 1930s,
The interest rate in the United States hit 0% in 2000, in the 1930s
and again in 2008.
and again in 2008.
The difference between a recession
The difference between a recession
and a deleveraging
and a deleveraging
is that in a deleveraging, borrowers' debt
is that in a deleveraging, borrowers that
burdens have simply gotten too
have simply gotten too big
and can't be
and can't be relieved
relieved by lowering interest rates.
by lowering interest rates.
Lenders realize that debts have become too large to
Lenders realize that debts have become too large
ever be fully paid back.
to ever be fully paid back.
Borrowers have lost their ability to
Borrowers have lost their ability to
repay, and their collateral has lost value.
and their collateral has lost value.
They feel crippled by the debt.
They feel crippled by the debt.
They don't even want more.
They don't even want more.
Lenders stop lending.
Lenders stop lending.
Borrowers stop borrowing.
Borrowers stop borrowing.
Think of the economy as being not creditworthy,
Think of the economy as being not creditworthy,
just like an individual.
just like an individual.
So what do you do about a deleveraging?
So what do you do about a deleveraging?
The problem is debt burdens are too high and
The problem is that burdens are too high
they must come down.
and they must come down.
There are four ways this can happen.
There are four ways this can happen. Well, it doesn't end, but if you can have time, I really recommend you to spend more time watching this one and get the understanding of basic cycle, economic cycle, then maybe can help more you to be prepared for any crisis, especially in terms of your personal investment. So that's all for today. Bye.